Hello and welcome to the Money Compass. In each of our Money Journey episodes, Julie brings to you a special guest to share their treasured memories along with the highs and lows of their very own unique and emotional money journey.
So, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, it is good afternoon. What am I saying? And today I'm joined by Deb Morgan, who is the Real Relationship Coach, and she's going to be talking to us all about her money journey. So welcome, Deb. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much for having me.
So to start you off, I'm going to start you off a nice, easy question for you. Well, hopefully it's nice and easy. You might be dreading this part of it. And what is your earliest money memory?
Oh, goodness. Well, I think I've got two which are around the same age. And I want to share both of them because they're both quite different.
Okay.
The first one is of my mother sitting at the dining room table doing her books on a weekly basis. My mum used to work in a bank many years ago, and throughout her career, she always worked in finance and banking and then a building society. And every week, without fail, she would take out her notebook, her record book, and write down all the money that had come in and all the money that had gone out. Even to this day, and she's now 75, she can still tell you to the penny how much money is going in and out of her account. So that's my earliest memory in that respect. There's also another one, again linked to my mother. When I was about 5 or 6, and actually it was 1977, I was 6 years old, so I can date that one quite accurately. The Queen's Silver Jubilee, lots of people had street parties, and our street was no different. And my mum had made bunting to go across the street. When the party was over and everything had been tidied away, I took the flags off the bunting and went round to all of the neighbours on the estate we lived on and sold those flags for 2p each, because I was a member of a gym club at the time and my parents wouldn't buy me the branded gym club bag, and I really wanted it. So I thought, well, I've got to make the money myself. So I went and sold the bunting flags. And I thought that was great. Did quite well. So, made quite a bit at that time, 1977, I think I made about £5, which was a lot of money then for a 6-year-old. And my mother discovered that I had sold the flags by hearing money chinking in my cardigan pocket that I was wearing, and told me off for selling rags to our neighbours, and made me go back around all of the people who bought them and give them their money back. She was so embarrassed that I'd done this. So there's two real sort of opposing money memories, if you like, but they're both around the same time. That's why I wanted to share them both.
No, that's very, very good. Well, that is interesting, because if we look at how your money mindset is set by the age of 7, that kind of was, as you say, quite opposing kind of views. You must have been very confused about money when you were little.
Well, wait till you hear my story.
Absolutely. And I think that leads quite naturally onto your own personal money journey. So, Deb, I'm delighted. Well, I'm looking forward for you to share your story.
Okay, well, goodness me. I mean, like most children, I had a Saturday job, and I started, my very first job was a Sunday newspaper round for which I got paid £1 a week. And oh my goodness, the things I could do with that pound. They always say, older people always say, oh, money went so much further when I was younger. But that pound, I seem to be able to do everything with. Then obviously I progressed to other Saturday jobs, working in a supermarket, then Habitat. Then I had bar jobs as I got older. But I was always able to do so much with the money that I had. Even saving for foreign holidays was something that I was able to do. Okay, I was living at home at the time, but I was still paying my parents some sort of housekeeping as well. As soon as I started earning, Mum said, I'm taking a percentage from you, so you get used to having to put it into rent or mortgage or whatever it is. So I was always used to doing that and managed to save really, really well. Then I got married when I was 20 to my first husband. And again, we seemed to do really well, bought our first house. I was just 20 when we bought the first house. And that marriage ended. It was an abusive relationship. That marriage ended really when I was 22, finally got divorced when I was 24. I then found myself the owner of a house that I really struggled to keep up with the house, the bills. My ex-husband had, when I got the house back, he'd completely emptied it. And when I say emptied it, he'd taken light switches off the wall, carpets off the floor, the ballcock out of the tank in the attic even. So the house was in a state of disrepair and I needed to repair that. So it was the first time I'd used a credit card. to really just try and get the house back to a place where I could live in it. Didn't buy massively expensive things, but bought things. And that was the start of what was to become, I suppose, a really dangerous relationship with money for me through most of my adult life. Because every time I couldn't afford something, I would put it on the credit card. And being on a very low salary back then, being on my own, I'd lived on my own for quite some time, I was constantly running out of money before I ran out of month. So obviously topping up with credit card. And it was only later in my 20s that I really got into difficulty with credit cards. But managed to sort that all out, paid off everything I owed, and started again. Then I met my second husband, and that was fine. There was a little bit of debt hanging around, but not a huge amount. And it was very, very manageable. And we ended up getting married, buying a house together. And then I started my first business. And the business was doing very well. But when I started the business, my husband was unemployed and out of work. I just had my son, who's now 16. And the business started primarily because I knew I wanted to be a mum, and I wanted to combine work and raising my son. And when I'd left my job, and I was in a very good job, a well-paid job at that time, and what I didn't realize was that they were going to renege on their maternity agreement. It was a privately owned company. I was PA to the company chairman, and he'd always looked after me really, really well. And when I told him I was pregnant, going on maternity leave, I'd said to him, what do I need to do about maternity leave? Because according to my contract, I think at the time I would only get 6 months, but that was on half pay. So I need to know, because I need to give the relevant amount of notice to come back to work. And looking at it, I'd worked out I needed to go back to work really at about the 3-month mark. And he kept saying to me, don't worry about it. I will look after you. You need to take your full maternity. It's important that you have that time with your baby. And even up until the day I left on maternity leave, he was still saying the same to me. And even though I'd asked for it in writing, he was still saying, you don't need it in writing. This is an agreement between you and I. I will look after you. You take your full maternity leave. So I had no reason to think that he wouldn't look after me. We'd always had a really good relationship in the workplace. So I was quietly confident. Unfortunately, when it came to, I think it was what would have been my second salary, my son was about 3 weeks old, I discovered that he completely reneged on his agreement. My salary had gone down to half of what it was. My husband was unemployed, and the money that I had in didn't even cover our mortgage. So I was in major, major difficulties. So I immediately gave my notice to the company that I was going back to work, and it worked out. I went back to work when my son was about 10 weeks old. But things didn't work out. And I kind of, as soon as my son was born, I knew I would struggle to go back to work full time. So I was looking at ways that I could run my own business or set up something on my own that would bring in an extra income. My husband kept saying to me, I'll be a house husband, you go back to work, you've got a far greater earning power than I have. And at the time I did. So naively, I listened to him and I started the business. And then one day I went into the office, into my job, and the chairman had to go at me about something. And I completely lost it. And I said, you know what, if you're unhappy with me, I'll give you something to be unhappy about. And I logged off my computer, locked up my office, and walked out. Arrived home, and my husband said to me, what are you doing home this early? I said, I've quit. He said, what, you mean you've resigned? I said, no, I've quit with immediate effect. The HR manager phoned me that afternoon to say, look, obviously, you've just had your baby, have the weekend to calm down, come back. I said, I won't be coming back. And that was it. That's how my first business started, really. So I then knew I had to go out and make as much money as possible to cover our bills. And that's all it was about, covering our bills. My husband refused to find work, saying, no, you're going to make this work. You're going to need somebody to look after our son. So I will look after him. You can do this. Again, naively, I believed him. And I'm pleased to say I did build the business. The business on the face of it was very successful. What was a lifestyle business, and I was told by the banks, etc., it was a lifestyle business, and none of the banks would even consider giving me any sort of loan or overdraft because it was a lifestyle business as far as they were concerned. Within 2 years, I got that business to £250,000 turnover. But of course, we all know with hindsight, turnover is a vanity number. And whilst I had the turnover, obviously I was having to take out money from the business to pay some of my bills. But because the business had grown so quickly, I'd taken on staff as well. And my salary bill was around £10,000 a month. So I wasn't taking an awful lot out of the business. Most of my expenses were going on credit because that was the only money really available to us. I needed to make sure I had enough money to pay my staff. I needed to make sure I had enough money to keep the business going. And managed to maintain that for another year or so. And the business was just over 3 years old when I logged into the bank, the online banking, to pay my staff, and it was New Year's Eve 2008. Looked at the bank account and realized there wasn't enough money to pay the staff. And what had happened was my 3 largest clients had decided that they were going to pay me after Christmas, after the Christmas period, not at their usual time. And when I contacted them and said to them, look, I need you to pay me, there's no money in the bank, I can't pay my staff. They said, well, we'll pay you after Christmas. I said, look, that's going to be too late. There will be no business after Christmas. I won't be able to continue to support you. And I knew enough to know that my company was insolvent. So made some phone calls, Googled, made some phone calls and discovered, yes, the company was insolvent, and was told that I had to close the company straight away. Otherwise I was trading illegally. And I needed to ring my team and make them redundant with immediate effect and no pay. And Julie, I know you've got a very strong team there. Imagine having to ring your team on New Year's Eve and say to them, that's it. It was hands down the worst day of my life. What happened that day as well was my husband was less than supportive. I guess it's no surprise. You know, when you look back and you join the dots, you can see the writing on the wall. But he was less than supportive and said to me, it's all your fault. What do you think? Who do you think you were to be able to run a business? Everybody's laughing at you. They know you couldn't do it anyway. Well, you've just ruined everything. And I knew in that moment that my second marriage was also over. And that had been an abusive marriage, but I hadn't realized that until after I'd left him. So by the time I dealt with that, and I had to take the business through insolvency on my own, I then ended up going through personal bankruptcy, and I left my husband, but I had nowhere to go. I had no money. I couldn't afford anything. And I was stuck. You know, I was carrying quite a bit of debt from the business. It wasn't a huge amount in the grand scheme of things. It was about 35 grand from the business. But then there were debts that my husband had created in my name, which I was still finding out about as little as 3 years ago. So we've been separated or divorced 12 years. And as little as 3 years ago, I was still finding debts that he had accrued in my name. And there's a whole other story going on behind there. So when the business went through, there was 35 grand the business owed. I went through personal bankruptcy, and I was then liable for a lot of the debt that was on the credit cards. Over the years, I did really well at paying a lot of that down, slowly building my credit history back up, because you can imagine at that point going through bankruptcy, well, the credit history was zero. So I had to build that back up, and I became bankrupt in 2009. It stayed on my credit history until 2015. So from 2015 up until now, pretty much, I'd spent a lot of time working to really repair my credit history. Something else then came up is that when I left my husband, my second husband, I left my son with him because I had nowhere to go, didn't know where I was going to go, didn't want to drag a then 3-year-old around spare beds or spare rooms until I was settled. And he was quite settled with his dad. Eventually, I got myself settled, got a flat, a lovely flat on top of a cliff overlooking the sea. It was absolutely beautiful. My parents had to go as guarantors because of bankruptcy. At that point, I was in a stage where I could afford to pay the rent. And my mum said to me, if you have to call on us to be guarantors, we're happy to stand. But if we have to actually pay up, that's going to destroy our pension. So don't you dare give us need to use our pension. And of course, there's no way I was going to do that to my parents. They've been really supportive of me over the years, going through 2 divorces, etc. So that was never my plan or my intention. Thankfully, that didn't happen. But I went then to get my son back from my husband, and he said to me, he's going to live with you over my dead body. I then embarked on what was to become, and I didn't know it at the time, but it was to become a 10-year legal battle to just become accepted and acknowledged as my son's primary carer, and for my son to live with me. And in the eyes of the law back then, if you left your child, you had voluntarily given up your right to be their primary carer. They weren't interested in the reasons. That was it, absolute black and white. So you can imagine the costs of a 10-year legal battle, which I am still paying for, despite the fact that my son has now been living with me for 4 years, nearly 5. And it's one of those, if I had to do it all over again, I would do it all over again. You do these things for your son, for your family. But that, again, has had a massive impact on my financial history, my credit history. So I now find myself in a position, yet again, having been made redundant during the pandemic as well, and that's when I started my coaching business properly, that all of a sudden I came to the realization that at 50 years old, I didn't know what it was like to be an adult with no debt. And that's a massive realization. Now, I'm happy that I have really worked so hard to clear the debts that I accrued over the years, the current debt, the legal fee debt. I've spoken to the credit card companies because I had to pay that on credit cards. When it comes to your child, you do whatever you have to do. And the credit card companies were fantastic. And anybody who's in significant debt, absolutely speak to your creditors, because they are there to help you. They will help you as long as you're open and honest with them. And that's something I'd learned through bankruptcy, actually, is if you are honest with them and they believe that you are doing what you can to take responsibility and get yourself out of the situation, they will help. So I was really lucky that I was able to get all of the interest frozen on all of my debt and then work out a repayment plan going forward that was manageable and is manageable. So it means I can still live. I'm not scrimping and saving to buy a loaf of bread or a tin of beans, which at one point, I was, when I was having gone through bankruptcy, it was really sort of counting out the coppers to try and be able to buy food to feed me and my son. So, it's nowhere near that bad, but it's a real eye-opener when you get to 50 and suddenly think, I don't know what it is to live without debt. And Julie, we've had a number of conversations, the work I've been doing on reducing that debt, on totally working on my money mindset. And I'm pleased to say that now, and with the help of yourself and your finance company, I have a pension in place. My pension, when I went through bankruptcy, my pension was seized back then. So I had to start all over again. And I was 40 then, so I had to start all over again. So I've now got a pension in place. I've got savings in place. I've got some investments in place, not massive amounts because I am still clearing debt, but I am now in the habit of saving regularly. And it makes such a difference, even to know that going into Christmas, which is when we're recording this, we're sort of November time, I'm going into Christmas knowing that I can afford it. I don't need to put it on credit cards. Not that I would, I don't even have a credit card anymore. But my money journey, and I sometimes wonder, has it been like that because my mum, when I was 6 years old, told me off for earning money and being entrepreneurial, and my visual memory of my mum sitting, counting the pennies or doing her books every week, told me that you've got to pay such close attention to your finances because, you could be pennies out and that's what matters. So I think my overall money mindset was one of scarcity and lack. Mm-hmm. And of course, again, looking back, my entire adult life in terms of money has actually been, for the most part, scarcity and lack. And it's only now just coming to that realization that, oh my word, you're 50 now, you've got 20 years now to really turn it around. And that's the plan. So that, in short, or long is my money journey.
No, that is absolutely fantastic. And what I really like about it is that all the way through, even when things have been really bad, you've always been, I want to clear this debt, I want to come out the other side. And the credit card has been there for things that are like what I would call like major things, like making the house habitable, obviously doing the legal battle as well, which again, like you say, you do what you have to do when it comes to your family. It is what it is, but your credit card debt has not been on the case of like things that you've not, I don't want to use the word waste because that sounds very bad when people do have addictions on buying shopping, but it's always been for things that I would class as kind of really like essentials in your life. And then you've been really, really conscious about, I want to clear that. I don't want that hanging over my head. So, your money mindset, however you see it, I think so. It's actually quite positive from that respect.
Thank you. And yeah, actually, I'd agree with that because, I'm not going to say there isn't maybe a pair of shoes or a handbag on the credit card. I am human after all. But for the most part, it has always been because of something urgent or an emergency. And yes, I've always taken responsibility. And it was something, even before I had done a lot of the personal development work that I have done. And of course, I now work in that field. But even back then, when the business went through, I said, nobody else is responsible for this. I'm the one that took the decision to put those purchases on the credit card. Even though it was right at the time, even though I believe we could pay it back, it was my decision. I have to take responsibility for it. And it's been interesting in the conversations, some of the more recent conversations I had with credit card companies, because I said, oh, well, we can write this off, we can write that off. And you get what I call the equivalent of the ambulance chasers. The minute you've got bad debt, you'll end up with a load of emails or text messages saying, you can write off this amount of debt. And whilst that's great, actually, no one was forcing me to make those purchases on a credit card. I took the decision to do that. I have to take responsibility for it. And you could argue, well, in which case I shouldn't have asked for a frozen interest, but then I never expected to be in a position where I couldn't pay it back. I'd had a very good job up until the pandemic. And although I'd always planned I was going to launch my own business, sort of at around this time, I hadn't planned for it to launch almost 2 years sooner than expected, and for me to be in that position. So it's about taking the steps, I think, that enabled me to deal with it in a responsible manner. So yeah, you're right, I've always taken responsibility for it. It might not be easy, but taking responsibility certainly helps you get listened to properly as well.
Yeah, definitely. And like when you're talking to people like the credit card companies or the loan companies, when you are in a situation, that's all they want to hear, honesty and to have that communication and not to leave it too late. Don't
Absolutely.
leave it until you basically default in before you call them. If you know it's coming, it's good to get that in first, to have that conversation.
Well, I can share an interesting story about that if you're happy for me to. I think I have 4 credit cards. 3 of them I found out, I've just discovered I'm on notice to be made redundant. This is what's going to happen. At the moment, I have no income, yada, yada, yada. He said, that's okay. That's not great, but fantastic. Thanks for letting us know. These are the steps we'll put in place. One of the credit card companies said, we can't do anything until you've defaulted. And I said, but this is crazy. I'm ringing to tell you that I will default because I have no income. What can we put in place? Sorry, we can't have that conversation with you until you have defaulted. When I defaulted, they then contacted me to say, you've defaulted on your credit card. And I said, yeah, what a surprise. I've been telling you that for the last 6 weeks. I knew that was coming. And they said to me, we're going to send you letters that they're computer generated. The next 3 letters you get from us, you have to ignore. So I thought, okay, that's a bit interesting, but fine. It's a long time since I had to have these conversations previously. Yeah. So maybe things have changed. I'll listen to what they're telling me. So I got the first letter through and it was a demand notice. And I thought, I'm not happy just to ignore this letter. So I phoned them up and I said, I've had this letter. It's a demand for full and final payment. I just want to be sure. You told me I had to ignore this letter. Want to be sure, should I ignore it? Yes, absolutely ignore it. Don't worry about it. You'll receive another 2 letters. Ignore them. Next letter came, exactly the same thing happened. And then the 3rd letter came, if you do not make full and final payment, basically we're going to send the bailiffs round. And I'd never been, despite being bankrupt, I'd never been in that position before. So I phoned them up and I said, look, I'm really concerned about this. You told me this was the next letter I had to ignore. But quite frankly, a letter of this tone and this threatening nature, I can't just sit back and ignore it. They said, but you do need to ignore it. Don't worry. So I ignored it. I ended up submitting a complaint to that company because I thought, for a start, you didn't help me when I said I was going to be in trouble. I gave you enough notice to say this was coming. Then you're sending me letters which would give me sleepless nights.
Yeah.
This isn't actually helping me to deal with the situation I'm in. So I submitted a complaint saying, I'm quite lucky that having been through this situation, I'm quite strong, I'm able to handle it. But if I was a much more vulnerable person, this could have a massive, massive impact on my mental health. It's quite frightening. We need to deal with it. That complaint is now over a year old and is still being investigated. The debt has since been handed over to a finance company to just reclaim the debt. So I'm paying that back. The interest has been frozen. But the finance company has said to me, we can't actually discuss your debt with you because there is still a complaint going through. But actually, we're happy to take your money off you. So I'm still paying the debt, but I can't talk to anybody about it. I can't access the account. Thankfully, I kept a note of how much I owed and how much I've been paying off every month. But for the majority of finance companies, credit card companies, they were fantastic and have been amazing. But this one particular one, what a nightmare. It goes against everything I have ever been told, I've ever learned about being upfront and honest with companies you owe money to. So that's been a really interesting learning curve.
You definitely won't be getting a credit card of them in the future.
No, absolutely not.
No, definitely. Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us, Deb. It's really interesting. While you've got everyone's attention, do you want to tell everyone what you actually do and where people can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you said at the top of this interview, I'm Deb Morgan, the Real Relationships Expert. And so there's no prizes for guessing that I help executive women and female business owners to create strong, healthy and robust relationships. You'll find me across social media. My moniker across most of the platforms is Deb Morgan Coach, or you'll find me on my website, which is deb-morgan.com.
Excellent. That's great. And my final question for you, obviously, as it is the Money Compass podcast, is what is your favorite holiday destination and why?
Oh my goodness. Do you know what? I love narrowboating. My partner and I, we like to go narrowboating once a year, but we always go during February in the winter. And I love it so much because it is quiet, it is peaceful. It's just us and nature and wildlife pootling along at 4 miles an hour, seeing the British countryside from a perspective that you don't generally see it unless you're on a narrowboat. So I think narrowboating in the English countryside would be my favourite holiday destination, but there are lots of other places in the world that I would love to visit.
I'm sure there is. Oh, that's brilliant. No, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll catch up with you very soon.
Thanks, Julie.
And with that, we've completed today's episode. We hope you have enjoyed following along with us today and taking another step closer to a financially secure future.
If you've enjoyed today's podcast, you can head over to themoneycompass.co.uk where you can find out more information, hints and tips from today's episode.
If you'd like to get more involved, share your own experiences and learn from a friendly community on a similar journey to you, why not join us in our Facebook group, The Money Compass, where we will support you in navigating your way to financial success.
Thank you for listening and see you next time.